Chaos looms in Washington after Kevin McCarthy was ousted from his powerful position as House Speaker in a historic vote. So what happens next? We spoke with Senator Elizabeth Warren and more about this unfolding situation and its implications on the Hill.
Thanks to a short-term stopgap bill, the government can stay open through mid-November. But notably absent from Saturday's last-minute deal, additional funding for Ukraine. President Biden pressed Republican leadership on Sunday to back an additional bill, providing more aid to the nation, saying he fully expects Speaker McCarthy to keep his commitment to pass additional funding. Joining us now with what's on his radar, we've got Rick Newman. Hey, Rick.
Hey, guys. Well, it's good news that the government continues to operate. But the reason that this deal got through is because they excluded further aid for Ukraine. And that is the wrong issue to play chicken with. So what's probably going to happen here is there will be further action down the road within the next few weeks. Congress probably will approve most or perhaps even all of the ongoing Ukraine aid Biden is asking for. But this is a bad look. And this is honestly exactly what Russian President Vladimir Putin wants to see. He wants to see dissension in the United States, among the leadership in the United States. He wants to see political fragmentation and fracturing over this issue because his big bet is that Joe Biden will lose re-election in 2024. President Donald Trump will become president. And Donald Trump has basically said he does not support aid for Ukraine. And he has said he will solve this problem in 24 hours, which basically means he will cave to Putin, withdraw all U.S. aid. And if the U.S. aid goes, then a lot of the European aid goes, and the international support, this very strong coalition of support for Ukraine, basically crumbles. And for people who are saying to themselves, why should we care about Ukraine? There are very compelling reasons to care about Ukraine, even if you don't care about democracy in Ukraine or you don't care about democracy in Eastern Europe. Look, we're spending a grand total of about 5% of the defense budget to help Ukraine and provide military support for Ukraine. What do we get for that? Well, we have two big geopolitical foes, Russia and China. And for that 5% of the defense budget, Ukraine degrades Russia's military power every single day. It weakens Russia's global political power every single day. And we're getting a great return on that 5% of the defense budget. By the way, no American troops are there in Ukraine doing any of this. All we're doing is providing money. I could go on and on why this is money well spent, but we need to show better unity. And I would love to see President Biden, frankly, be more forceful and more clear, telling Americans why we need to continue this funding.
Well, Congressman Matt Gaetz introduced a motion to vacate House Speaker McCarthy from his leadership position on Monday. That's after threatening the action for the last few weeks. But what exactly is a motion to vacate? Well, here to break it down for us is Yahoo Finance senior correspondent Rick Newman. Hey, Rick.
Hey, Rochelle. It's basically a motion to recall the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Technically, it's a motion to vacate the chair. And it sounds like we're going to get some action on this today. McCarthy has said he's going to begin this process today. He has 48 hours from the time it is filed. And we're going to get something today. Now, what that's going to be is unclear. There are a lot of complex and arcane sort of parliamentary procedures that affect the way this could go. The whole vote to basically recall McCarthy could end up getting blocked. There could be a vote and he could prevail, or there could be something that threatens his speakership. And we will know more in a few hours, it sounds like, as it sounds like this is going to come up in the House at some point in early or mid-afternoon today.
And so, Rick, what does this mean for the balance of power here? Obviously, it took a lot for McCarthy to even get this post. There was a lot of infighting just to get him here. And now, of course, we have the can kick down the road when it comes to the next potential government shutdown. What does this do for the balance of power here?
Well, Republicans will still control the House, whether Kevin McCarthy is the Speaker of the House or not. But they only have a 4-vote majority, and it's that tiny majority that's the problem here, because there are 4, 5, 6, maybe 8 rambunctious sort of hard right Republicans who are mad that they wanted McCarthy to shut down the government. They are mad that he made a deal to fund the government over the weekend, and that is what has led to this recall effort. So, how much power do 5 or 6 members of the House, given that there are 435 members of the House. How can it be that, fewer than a dozen people actually are putting the House into turmoil? This is the problem with a very small majority. So just as a reminder, they elect the Speaker with a simple majority vote. You just got to get one more than a simple majority to become Speaker. But normally, the minority party does not give any votes to the majority party Speaker. So if Kevin McCarthy got some Democratic votes and most of the Republican votes, he would have no problem becoming Speaker. And that is one of the possible avenues here, is that he gets some Democratic votes along with most Republican votes. But in order to do that, he would have to give the Democrats some major concessions, such as legislation that Republicans would never pass on their own, that Democrats might want to get to pass. He says he's not going to do that. So McCarthy has surprised everybody with his ability to survive so far. He could do it again, but even if he does, these sorts of challenges from inside his own party are just going to continue to probably hobble him for the next year and a half that this Congress remains in session.
Indeed. He was tweeting earlier that, if he ends up losing his job because of averting a government shutdown, he said, so be it. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. A big thank you there to our very own Rick Newman.
See you, Rochelle.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, as we just told you moments ago, ousted from his role. The vote just wrapping up, and Yahoo Finance senior columnist Rick Newman is here. This seemed not necessarily likely or thinkable just a few days ago, Rick, and now it's happened here. 216 to 210, Kevin McCarthy no longer Speaker of the House.
Well, it's never happened before in U.S. history. We've never had a Speaker removed, and let's remind everybody, removed by his own party. Or by a small sort of rump faction within his own party. So the obvious question is, what happens next? And this doesn't mean McCarthy is finished. Basically, we start over in the bid to elect a House Speaker, and the House is going to have to stay in session until they have a Speaker. So McCarthy can basically try again, which is what he did the first time around, when I think we had 17 rounds of votes. He couldn't get to the majority vote threshold for several days, but he finally got there. And so people might say, well, what would change between now and then? Well, McCarthy has to find. I think there were 8 Republicans basically who voted against him here, and that was enough because all Democrats also voted against him. So McCarthy could just try to do some deal making with some of those 8 holdouts, and I think he would need to convert either 3 or 4 of them. So what could he give them, in terms of projects for their districts or committee seats or something like that? Another interesting possibility, we briefly got to this earlier in the hour, but McCarthy or somebody could form an alliance with Democrats. Remember, Democrats have almost a majority in the House, and if you got most of the Democrats and some Republicans voting for a candidate, that person could become Speaker. Now, there would be, more chaos in the Republican Party, I guess. But that's another way this could go. And I'm sure there are some possibilities that the supercomputers haven't yet been able to figure out. But this is a weird and literally unprecedented situation. So welcome to more chaos in Washington.
Fun stuff. As Liz Ann Sanders said, you'd have to be living under a rock to think that this is new chaos. There's just new flavors, I suppose, of the chaos, Rick. I'm seeing reports here that the interim speaker for right now is Patrick McHenry. So he has recessed the House. So both sides can sort of figure out what the heck to do now. When you talk about McCarthy potentially allying with Democrats as one of the possibilities here, He just has said in the past 24 hours that he would not do that, and that seems to have cost him, at least one of the reasons it's cost him his speakership. His party is also trying to impeach the sitting president, so throw that into the mix as well here when you try and figure out, could there be some kind of alliance?
Right. This is why I say it takes a supercomputer to sort of figure out all the different directions this could go. So let's say there were some kind of deal between McCarthy or somebody else who would have to be a fairly moderate Republican certainly not one of the batwing Republicans that have thrown this whole thing into chaos. If they were to try to make a deal with Democrats, I mean, I think one of the first things Democrats would say is, well, one of our conditions is shut down the Biden impeachment inquiry. They also want more. They want to get through a bill that provides $24 billion, if not more, in aid for Ukraine. And I'm sure there's a long wish list of things the Democrats would say, well, here's what we want. Now, even moderate Republicans probably wouldn't go along with that. So I don't know how this is going to shake out. And all the political analysts I follow are all scratching their heads. One thing I will say is, guess who ends up looking pretty good in all of this? President Biden. And in fact, Democrats themselves actually look pretty good. Democrats basically don't have this type of civil war happening that throws the whole Congress into an unworkable situation when they're in control. And President Biden, the Biden White House keeps sending out what they call these split screen analyses saying, well, here's what the clown Republicans are doing. And here's what President Biden is doing. He's working to fix the border problem. He's meeting with foreign leaders. He's doing all this serious stuff, whereas these Republicans are just having a food fight among themselves. So there's some potential traction for Biden and Democrats here with regard to the next election, as long as they can sort of keep reminding voters of this. And if Republicans keep doing this, keep shooting themselves in the foot, of course, that's good for Democrats.
It is interesting, just on that point, Rick, while you were talking, I'm seeing this statement from House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, and he put out a statement that he and other Democratic leaders would vote yes on Congressman Gates' motion to oust McCarthy. And he says here, it is now the responsibility of the GOP members to end the House Republican civil war. So I guess, Rick, that kind of speaks to your point here, how Democrats feel when they sort of watch McCarthy and the GOP and House members kind of twisting in the wind here.
I mean, simple rule of politics. When your opponent is screwing up, get out of the way. And that's all Democrats have to do here. Let's remind everybody, this deal to keep the government funded was only for 7 weeks. So we're going to get to the middle of November and we're going to face a shutdown situation all over again. And we're going to have to figure out whether Congress can pass the normal bills that they, for the most part, have always passed that just keep the government working. So we are going to have a speaker by then, but will this situation with basically 5 or 10 extreme Republicans holding the whole rest of the government hostage, are we going to be able to get past that? Or are we just going to have a replay of that in November? I don't think anybody knows.
They don't know. And that uncertainty also seems to be weighing on stocks. Even after the tough session that we had, it looks like futures are pushing lower, but we'll see how this all shakes out as we head through the morning and the next few weeks, the next couple months, figure out what's going to happen here. Rick Newman, thank you so much for breaking all of that down for us.
Let's get to the latest down in D.C. The House voted to remove Kevin McCarthy as Speaker in a historic vote. Now, Congressman Patrick McHenry, a Republican from North Carolina, will serve as acting Speaker for the time being. But Republicans do not have a clear pick as successor. For more on that, we want to bring in James Carville. He is a political strategist and host of the Politics War Room podcast. James, it's great to see you here. So I guess just your reaction to really what's played out over the last several days, ending with the vote that we got yesterday in the ouster and the fact that McCarthy was ousted.
So many times my phone rings and the first thing I hear somebody say, can you believe this blank? All right. And the truth is, I've just come to the point where I'll believe anything I see that comes out of Washington, including the events of yesterday. But it's pretty remarkable. And when you view it in the historical context, it's even more remarkable. I mean, when you were watching it, you were saying, that just can't be happening. And then when you actually read some of the commentary on it, it's more unbelievable than when you're watching it.
James, at what point do you believe that we are going to see some type of normalcy, whatever new normalcy looks like in Washington? When do you believe that will resume? What will it take? And will that address issues, especially economic issues, that Americans are putting upon both parties to try and come to common sense solutions around?
Well, first of all, I don't know. What happened yesterday was anything but common sense. And we've always had political parties and ideological differences, but the question is, when do we stop this descent? I wish I had a better idea. I suspect that the younger generation has a more positive view of pluralism in America than the older generation does. But it's a good question, and I can't answer it. And honestly, I don't think anybody else can. We can only hope.
James, what do you think this really tells us? The fact that the House is leaderless, the fact that it was done because of a small fraction within the party, the far right, being able to do this, what it really tells us just about the direction of the GOP and what we can expect to play out over the next 13 months until the 2024 election?
Well, one of the things we always told that elections have consequences. Elections that have a narrow win really have consequences. And remember, the Democrats had the same majority +4 that McCarthy had. And because of Pelosi's skill and just Democrats wanting to come together, we had nothing like these kinds of issues. And I think most of the stuff that's there now, they raise money off of the cell phone and they send out blast requests. And Matt Gaetz probably had his biggest fundraising day. He doesn't care. Yeah, it's how much you can be on social media, it's how much you can raise online. And we're trying to run a government where people are not terrorized by bad stories about them, anything. They're terrorized by their cell phones and how people are going to respond to it. And that's how this stuff ends up.
Yeah, just as long as he's not doing that fundraising through Venmo. All the things considered here that we have to look forward to over the next year, where do you believe that in all of the conversation in and around Washington, Capitol Hill, where that will continue to move business leaders to want to place their own interests as well? Because that's one of the more kind of weighty parts of this that we continue to evaluate on a day in, day out basis, the business leaders that are looking for some type of answers.
Yeah, I say this in all sincerity. Everybody knows I'm a partisan Democrat. The only hope, if you're a business leader and listen to this, the only hope there is for this country is the Democratic Party. You may not like that, you may not like things about it, or you may say that they're conflicted or anything you want. But given the current makeup of the Republican electorate, there's only one party in this country that even is remotely possible of producing sanity. And I really mean that. Being it as a partisan, but if you look at where they are, the composition of the voters and the people that make up the respective political parties, if you're a business leader, or you somebody that sees country kind of moving forward together and that kind of stuff, that's the only hope you have. I'm sorry. Sorry to bring the bad news to you.
James, let's talk about what the Biden administration, what President Biden, the re-election campaign is focusing on, because we certainly have seen this shift in his narrative, or I should really say how he's framing the fight against inflation, where the economy stands. They were out with a new ad this week talking about the view on the economy, trying to highlight some of the things that have been accomplished within the administration. What do you, just given your years and years of experience, think of this strategy and whether or not it's enough to really move the needle, given the fact that so many Americans still blame the Biden administration, whether they should or not, for the fact that prices are so high and the economy is where it is today?
It's always the argument. So you said people are not giving us credit for the economy, but look at what Paul Krugman says, or look at what the Bureau of Labor Statistics says. Well, look at what anybody else says. So the only way we can get credit is to take credit. But then somebody says, but yeah, if you take credit and you tell people the economy is good and they think it's not, then they have a backlash against you. I think they had to try to put in context the economic achievements they had, but it's so far it's proven to be a terribly hard sell. And the events of yesterday were 100% the fault generated by the Republican Party. But I do have I think it adds to people's sense that it just looks like everything is just going haywire in the country. And this might add to that sense too. But I don't blame them. They got to try to take credit. Got to be doing better than they're doing now. They're pretty sure they're pretty aware of that.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy was ousted from his speakership late yesterday. What are the implications here that you see? We've got another government funding deadline coming up in mid-November. Does it make it more arduous? And what does it mean for trying to get policy passed in this Congress?
I think of this as we've got to focus on where the problem is. People say Congress is dysfunctional. Congress is not dysfunctional. We're doing our job over here in the Senate. We're working through our budget bills and other things that need to be handled. The problem right now is a handful of Trump loyalists over in the House who think that chaos, that hurting American consumers, that damaging our economy and undermining our standing all around the world somehow is going to help Donald Trump get reelected. And look at the difference now between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats had the House and the Senate and the White House in the first 2 years after Joe Biden was elected. And what did we do? We passed a huge infrastructure bill that's really paying off around the country. We passed the biggest climate package in the history of the world. We put in a 15% minimum corporate tax, $35 insulin. It started to cancel student loan debts, which, by the way, just this week, the president of the United States canceled student loan debt for more people. He's now at 3.6 million people who've seen some of their debt canceled. It's making government work on behalf of the people. What have the Republicans done since they've been in charge? In the year and a half that they've run the House, they nearly didn't raise the debt ceiling and put the United States government in default. And then last weekend, they nearly didn't fund the government to keep it open. And those are their two big accomplishments. Look, we got to have people in government who believe in making government work for the people, not just here to create as much chaos as possible because it might help Donald Trump.
Senator, we've recently just gone over the so-called childcare cliff, nearly $38 billion in funding for childcare that was put in place during the pandemic has expired. I know that you pushed to try to get a supplemental in for that in this last go around. With the next deadline coming up in mid-November for government funding, will you push again for a supplemental? And what is the appetite? Have you spoken with Leader Schumer about this? Given what's going on in the House, is there appetite to push this through?
So, yes, I will be pushing. And yes, this is something that Democrats very much want to do. And I think we might be able to find some Republican allies if we can get the House up and functioning again. You know, I do want to say on this, we had a broken childcare market long before the pandemic. It was hard for families to find affordable, high quality childcare. It just wasn't out there. And childcare workers are paid near poverty wages. Then during the pandemic, it all fell apart. And that's why we put federal money in so those childcare slots would be there as mamas and daddies were able to go back to work. What this funding cliff means right now is that we're at risk for about 3.2 million babies to lose their childcare slots in the next couple of months because there's just not enough money to pay their teachers for those children's slots to stay open. Think about what that means. How many mamas are not going to be able to go back to work? How many daddies are not going to be able to go back to work? How many can't go back to school or continue the classes that they're in right now? How many babies are going to be parked in unlicensed centers where they're put in front of a television set with a whole bunch of other kids in front of, in someone's living room? Look, we need to invest in our children. And that means we need to make high quality, affordable childcare. And we call it childcare. It's early childhood education.
Senator, unfortunately, we're out of time, so we'll have to leave the conversation there. But thank you so much for your insight and hope to continue the conversation on this important topic of childcare with you in the future.
Thank you.
All right, well, moving on. The race is heating up among House Republicans to become the next House Speaker. House Majority Leaders Steve Scalise and Congressman Jim Jordan are the first to throw their hats in the ring. But our next guest is raising the concern that no matter who takes the gavel, it will be a difficult task to get consensus on key issues, including spending, as the government faces another threat of a shutdown next week. Joining us now is Jeanette Lowe, Strategist Securities Policy Research Managing Director. So, Jeanette, thank you so much for joining us. The race for the speakership is on here. Steve Scalise, Jim Jordan, do you have a horse in that race? Do you have bets you would place? And I guess the bigger question, would it actually matter here if it was Scalise or Jordan? Big differences between those two?
So there are differences that with terms of who may be a little bit more conservative and who might be a little bit more moderate and who might be able to get more of the votes from either side within the Republican caucus. But the issue is that, right now, McCarthy was the person who probably could have gotten the most votes out of the Republican caucus. So now one of these other individuals has to figure out how they can wrangle the most votes to then ultimately win that speakership. I think there are concerns on different sides about certain issues. Maybe Scalise still has, going through cancer treatments, and you have Jim Jordan being a little bit more conservative. So I think that people are going to have to figure that out. But for us, the bigger issue right now is, that Speaker McCarthy was deposed yesterday. The House is not going to come back until next Tuesday, which means an entire week is now being lost where we're not actually even working on any of the budget issues that were going to potentially cause a government shutdown 4 days ago. And we don't necessarily know how easy this speaker vote may be. It could be that it's quite chaotic, similar to what McCarthy faced in January. And that dysfunction is starting to play into the markets. And we're starting to see people being a little bit more worried about whether or not policymakers are actually able to keep the government functioning.
That is definitely appears to be a concern. I mean, so what's the answer then to that? Are we going to get that shutdown, especially with that lost time, and especially with the pressure from the right wing of the party that caused the McCarthy to be removed in the first place?
Right, exactly. So there's nothing that's really changed in the Republican caucus except the fact that McCarthy is no longer the head of it. So whoever takes over as speaker really still has to wrangle what to do with this very tight majority, how to wrangle with the moderate concerns with the conservative concerns, and then figure out how to go forward from there. So there may be some horse trading to actually get the votes for the speakership, and maybe that will ultimately get us a deal that comes through. If we think back to what happened in 2015 when Boehner stepped down as speaker, Paul Ryan actually was able to pass a budget deal that Boehner never was able to do so. So a new speaker may come in with some political capital and may be able to move us forward. But at the same time, what we're seeing right now doesn't give us a whole lot of confidence as we're looking forward to November 17th and the fact that we might still have another government shutdown. At that point, we're not really seeing any change yet on how do you solve the budget issues? How do you solve what are we going to do about Ukraine funding and other fiscal priorities? And all of this is happening at the same time that we're seeing slowdown in the consumer, slower labor market growth. You're seeing issues with the debt costs as we continue to see higher debt servicing costs because of higher interest rates. And that's putting even more pressure on the budget as well. And I think investors in particular are really starting to just look at what is going on in Washington and starting to be a little bit uncomfortable about whether or not policymakers are actually going to be able to handle these issues as they come due. And that's something that is going to continue to put pressure, I think, especially on bond yields.
And Jeanette, so lots of moving parts here. If this does perhaps increase the risk of a government shutdown, do you think that also increases the risk of a Moody's downgrade?
Right. So we have been concerned that if we had seen a government shutdown in the current month, that Moody's may potentially put the U.S. on a credit ratings watch. The Monday before we were potentially going into a shutdown, so last Monday, Moody's actually did say that they may intentionally do so because of a government shutdown, because the credit rating agencies have been more focused on process rather than finances. And if this speakership vote, again, takes a long time, if we continue to see a lot of dysfunction, if the House is still not able to move forward any bill in the House to actually pass a budget, or maybe they are, but they can't pass anything that's actually going to be able to go through the Senate, that might put Moody's back into play and have them continue to think about whether or not they should put the U.S. on credit watch. Again, particularly as we're looking at U.S. debt rising, net interest costs continuing to go up. And so that is a concern for us in particular. And the more dysfunction we see, we think that probability increases.
And that seems to be more of a concern of markets as well, not just the Moody's, but the debt servicing costs that you referred to. And in your notes to us, you used a word a potential word to apply to the U.S. that I haven't seen in a long time, and that word is austerity. We have not seen either party really enact anything resembling true austerity in a very long time. Is there any actual potential for that?
Yeah, so we have been looking historically at what happens when you have rising net interest costs. And, we have been in this period of fiscal stimulus for about 25 years now, where you could raise spending, you could cut taxes, and you weren't really seeing a big impact on U.S. debt servicing costs. That is all changing now after the inflation that we've had and the Fed's having to raise interest rates and now hold them there. So what we are now seeing is that we have net interest costs at above 14% of tax revenues. Historically, we have seen that has been the threshold, that once you reach above that level, that is where the U.S. starts to move from a period of stimulus to a period of austerity. And so that is what we are looking to see. We don't think it's going to flip on immediately, but that is something that is now moving forward. The one thing that complicates this a little bit is the 2024 election. So policymakers tend to not want to impose fiscal austerity ahead of an election because people want to get reelected. But the issues are coming due. And so this is something that policymakers are going to have to take into consideration. They may not move before the 2024 election, but the other big issue is that when we get into 2025, we potentially have a new president, potentially have Biden still at the helm. There are all of the individual tax cuts that were passed as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Those all expire at the end of 2025 too. So there'll also be another fiscal cliff coming that kind of adds into all of these dynamics.
Jeanette, thank you for joining us today. That was great. We appreciate it. That was Jeanette Lowe from Strategist.
Lawmakers have until mid-November to reach a deal to keep the government open. And without a speaker at the helm, the House can't move forward on any spending bills. Rating agency Moody's previously warned that a government shutdown could put pressure on the U.S.'s credit. Yahoo Finance's Rick Newman joins us now with why a credit downgrade is still worth keeping on your radar. Hey, Rick.
Hey, guys. Well, first of all, it seems possibly more likely than before that we are going to have a government shutdown in November. The political analysts I've been following on this say it's very hard to see how Congress is going to get all the bills finished that need to fund the government. Remember, the House at the moment is basically not functioning. And even if it does get a speaker, all the dynamics that we saw leading up to the chaos of the last week are likely to remain in place. And Moody's has already warned that if there is a government shutdown, it could be the third rating agency to lower the U.S. credit rating from the AAA level, the best there is, that the United States has enjoyed for most of its history until recent times. And all of the, so Standard & Poor's has downgraded the United States. That went all the way back to 2011. Fitch downgraded the United States earlier this year. And the problem is not the creditworthiness of the U.S. government. All of these rating agencies keep pointing out the problem is political. It's that lawmakers and policymakers simply cannot run the country in a coherent fashion, and this almost always lands on Republicans. It is Republicans who are the ones who are threatening not to pay, $33 trillion in U.S. debt. It's Republicans who are always doing the shutdown theatrics. And this is starting to matter. I mean, this rise in interest rates and bond rates that we've been talking about during the last several weeks are related to the size of the U.S. debt and to probably related to this situation with the credit rating of the United States. And it's beginning to look like you can say that higher interest rates, which are costing Americans money through more expensive mortgages, car loans, and so on, part of that is because of these idiots in Washington. So these politicians who cannot get the job done, almost all of them Republicans, are starting to cost ordinary people money, and we need to turn this around.
Rick, talk about a little bit more about what this exactly could mean for investors, because I think a lot of people largely brushed it off just in terms of the risks there. But if we do see a government shutdown, if we do see a downgrade here in the credit rating, just what the possible implications of that are.
It does not have direct implications for most things investors care about. I mean, it's not like the stock market is going to tank the day after Moody's becomes the third rating agency to lower the U.S. credit rating. But everybody is now talking about what's happening in the bond market. And the bond market does not announce why interest rates are going up exactly, but it's very clear that we are seeing interest rates going up no longer because the Federal Reserve is pushing short-term rates up. Interest rates are going up, medium and long-term rates are going up for other reasons. And it's probably not one simple thing. We do not know if this is sort of permanent, temporary, what's going on, but it is probably the case. And, you're just starting to hear people trying to figure this out. It's probably the case that high levels of U.S. Public debt and the political problems in Washington that could lead to another downgrade are part of the reason that medium and long-term interest rates are going up. Again, this is the mortgages. We've got mortgages now over 7%. We have had medium and long-term rates going up by more than short-term rates for the last several months. So it's not the Fed anymore. It is other factors that are affecting the bond market. And it does seem like the so-called bond market vigilantes who have been asleep for the last 20 years are starting to wake up.